Okay, so we've talked about strings, we've talked about generics. So if I add array list bracket string bracket and call it whatever I want, new array list bracket string, then everything inside it has to be a string. Okay, we got that, no problem. But this is kind of a little confusing at this point. We've got our numbers. I can get rid of that. Actually, get rid of, there we go. Get rid of reading in the file. We don't need that. Okay. So we also know something about how array lists work. Everything about array lists has to do with inheritance. Internally, inside array lists, everything is stored as an object. During runtime, it checks, during compile time, should I say, it checks to see the generics, make sure everything is what it says in the brackets. In this case, it's an integer, and then it stores it, as an object. But notice that this says integer, not int. If I type int, that doesn't work very well. It gives me, unexpected type, and it just doesn't work. You have to have integer. And the reason is integer does use inheritance and does do, it inherits from the object class, which is how array lists simply work in Java. It's got this weakness. And so how do I add an int to integer? Well, the way they had this before is in order for me to actually do this, I had to do integer. I'll just call it temp equals new integer. And integer is a wrapper class. I'll add I. So wrapper that wraps the primitive inside an object. So it took my primitive int, put it in this object, and then I could put it in an array list. That was really cumbersome. And to get it back, well, then we'd have to get an integer back, and this would be what it would get back. And then I would say maybe int num, and I'll say num value equals num.int value. And then I'd have to change that there. And this would be, it was just very cumbersome. That's how it worked in Java for a while until they created auto boxing and boxing. So what is boxing? Well, instead of having to do this, we simply add it. And this is this part, this wrapper part, this is the boxing. So boxing, come here, click, there we go. Boxing, taking a primitive and wrapping it in the correct object class. So ints go to integer, float goes to float. You get the idea. And there's a whole bunch of them. In fact, I will show you a bunch right now. Hold on. So if we go to the Java API, so let's go here, Java 8 API, and then we're going to go down to the java.lang package. This is all the packages right here. And the java.lang package, as we talked about way in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, is always imported. Now, you probably forgot that, but it's there anyway. So the java.lang package, all these interfaces, all these classes are always imported no matter what. So you don't have to import these. But look, Boolean, byte, character, let's see, there's double, there's long, integer, float. All of these, even short, have their own wrapper class. So let's go ahead and click on integer and see it. Class, integer. The integer class wraps a value of the primitive type int in an object. An object of type integer contains a single field whose type is int. So there's a couple things you can do with it, like figure out what the biggest value, smallest value. There's a couple of methods you can play with. But the biggest point is They created that so we could put our primitives in an object and then put the object in things like an array list. Very annoying. Well, autoboxing is when I don't have to create an integer object and then put the primitive in it. I simply put the primitive in here. Now, what this does, this one line of code is equivalent to putting this here and then al.add_temp. So this, there we go, let me comment that out. This one line of code where it's autoboxing is equivalent to these two lines of code. This is what we had to do before autoboxing was created. And I think that happened in Java version 6, 5, 7, I can't remember. It happened in the past. And so you can still do this. I don't see any reason why you would want to. But we no longer have to manually wrap the integer and the end into an integer wrapper class and then put it in the array list. And so this right here, these two lines of code is equivalent to this one line of code of where I can simply get an int out of it. Int, I'll just call it num, or maybe just my int equals al.get I. Because what does that array list store? It does not store the end, it stores this wrapper object. So this is called auto unboxing. And now I can just print out my int. So it's important to understand exactly how it works inside. You have generics. It says, I'm only going to take an integer, not an int, because it has to be integer. And then you have autoboxing. So you can just add I directly, which the compiler does this for you. And then you can get it, and the compiler does this for you. Auto unboxing, and then you can just use it. So you can add and you can add ints directly. You can get ints directly now because of the auto boxing and auto unboxing, but you still can't type int into there. So you have to understand why. It's because the way it uses inheritance. The fact integer does inherit from the object class. Okay, so it's good. Primitives don't. It's just the way it is.